The gunslinger rode into Kingston, Nevada on a Tuesday morning when the sun had barely cleared the eastern mountains. And by the time he dismounted in front of the Silver Dollar Saloon, 3 men were already watching him with the kind of attention that meant either fear or calculation. Kade Emerson had seen that look before in 100 towns just like this one, where the dust settled thick on everything, and the only thing thicker was the desperation. He was 28 years old and had been hired for his guns more times than he cared to count, and this time would be no different. The telegram had been specific. Kingston needed a man who could handle trouble, and they were willing to pay handsomely for it. The mining operation on the outskirts of town had been plagued by raids, and the local law was either unwilling or unable to stop it. That was where Kade came in. He tied his horse to the hitching post and brushed the trail dust from his dark coat before stepping through the saloon doors. The interior was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the Nevada heat that had followed him for the last 50 miles. A handful of men sat scattered at tables, nursing drinks that looked like they had been nursing them since dawn. Behind the bar stood a woman, and when Kade's eyes adjusted to the light, he found himself staring longer than he meant to. She was wiping down the counter with deliberate, practiced movements, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid that fell over one shoulder. She looked up when he entered, and her eyes met his for just a moment before she returned to her work. There was something in that brief glance that told him she had seen men like him before, men who came to Kingston looking for work that involved violence, and she was not particularly impressed. Kade approached the bar and removed his hat. "Coffee, if you have it." The woman nodded without speaking and turned to the pot that sat warming on a small stove behind the counter. She poured him a cup and set it in front of him, and when their fingers nearly touched as he reached for it, she pulled back quickly, as if his proximity burned. "Thank you," he said, and she nodded again, still without words. He was about to say something else when a door at the back of the saloon opened and a portly man in a vest strode out, his face breaking into a wide smile when he saw Kade. "You must be Emerson. Got your wire you were coming. Name's Walter Briggs. I run the operation up at the mine." Kade shook the offered hand, noting the soft palm of a man who did not do much manual labor. "You said you had trouble." "More than trouble, friend. We have had 3 raids in the past month. Lost good men, lost equipment, lost ore. The sheriff here is about as useful as a screen door on a submarine, if you will pardon my saying so. We need someone who knows how to handle himself, and word is you are that man. What kind of raids are we talking about?" Briggs leaned against the bar, and the woman, Kade noticed, moved slightly further away, as if she wanted no part of their conversation. "Armed men, maybe 6 or 7 of them. They come at night, they know exactly where to hit, and they are gone before we can organize any kind of response. I think someone in town is feeding them information, but I cannot prove it." Kade sipped his coffee and found it surprisingly good, strong and bitter in exactly the right way. "You want me to stop them? I want you to make it clear that Kingston is not an easy target. Whatever that takes, I am willing to pay for. We have discussed it with the other business owners in town, and they are all contributing. $500, half now and half when the raids stop." It was good money, more than good. Kade set down his cup and considered. "I will need to see the mine, understand the layout. I will need to know who works there who might have reason to sell information, and I will need a place to stay. The mine we can show you today. As for lodging, Miss Olivia here runs rooms upstairs. Clean, quiet, and the price is fair." Briggs gestured to the woman behind the bar, who finally looked up again, her expression unreadable. "I have 1 room available," she said, and her voice was softer than Kade expected, with a slight rasp to it that suggested she did not use it often for long conversations. $3 a week includes breakfast. That will do, Kade said, and he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes, though whether it was approval or resignation he could not tell. The transaction was handled quickly. Briggs counted out $250 in gold coins and bills, which Kade tucked into an inside pocket. Olivia, as Briggs had called her, produced a key and set it on the bar without ceremony. Then Briggs was leading him back outside into the bright morning sun, talking about the mine and the men they had lost, and the fear that gripped the whole operation now. But as Kade followed him toward where horses were waiting, he found his thoughts drifting back to the woman in the saloon, to the way she had poured his coffee with such careful precision, and to the guardedness in her eyes that spoke of stories he did not yet know. The mine was a chaos of noise and movement, men hauling ore carts and working the sluices, the constant hammering from deep within the mountain where they were expanding the tunnels. Briggs showed him everything, introduced him to the foreman and several of the workers, most of whom looked at Kade with a mixture of hope and skepticism. They had heard promises before, he could tell. They had been told that help was coming, and yet the raids continued. Kade spent the afternoon walking the perimeter, noting the sight lines and the places where an attack might come from. The mine sat in a small valley with rocky hills on 3 sides, and the road to town on the 4th. It would be easy to approach under cover of darkness, especially if someone knew the guard rotation and the weak points in their defenses. "You post guards at night?" he asked Briggs as they walked back toward the main office. 3 men, rotating shifts, but they are miners, not fighters. First sign of trouble and they usually run for cover. That needs to change. I will train them, teach them how to hold a position, and we will need to set up better lighting around the perimeter. Fires, torches, anything that makes it harder to approach unseen. Briggs nodded eagerly. "Whatever you think is best. You have a free hand here, Emerson. Just stop these raids." They rode back to Kingston as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that were almost too beautiful for a place that bred such violence. Kade was tired from the long ride and the day's work, but when they reached the $1 and he climbed the stairs to the room Olivia had given him, he found the weariness lifting slightly. The room was small but clean, just as Briggs had promised. A bed, a washstand, a chair by the window. Simple, functional, and more than he usually got. He washed the dust from his face and hands, changed his shirt, and then headed back downstairs. The saloon was busier now, the after-work crowd filling the tables and the bar. Olivia moved among them with the same quiet efficiency she had shown that morning, pouring drinks and collecting empty glasses, her face pleasant but distant. Kade found a table in the corner where he could watch the room and ordered dinner. When Olivia brought it, she set the plate down and was about to leave when he spoke. "The coffee this morning was very good." She paused, and for the first time he saw a hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "I grind the beans fresh every day, makes a difference." "It does." He hesitated, then added, "I will likely be coming down for coffee most mornings if that is all right. You paid for breakfast. Coffee is included." And then she was gone, moving to the next table, leaving Kade to wonder why such a brief exchange had left him feeling strangely pleased. The days fell into a pattern. Kade would wake before dawn, dress, and head downstairs to find Olivia already at the bar with a fresh pot of coffee waiting. She never said much, just poured his cup and sometimes asked if he wanted food. He usually did, and she would bring him eggs and bread and sometimes bacon, all of it simple but well prepared. They would exchange a few words, nothing substantial, just the basic pleasantries of two people who found themselves in the same space at the same time each day. But Kade found himself looking forward to those mornings more than he cared to admit. There was something calming about Olivia's presence, something steady and real in a life that had been defined by movement and violence. She did not ask him questions about his work or his past. She did not try to charm him or flirt with him the way saloon women sometimes did. She simply poured his coffee and let him be, and somehow that was exactly what he needed. At the mine, things were progressing slowly. Kade had organized the guards into proper shifts and drilled them on how to hold their positions and when to fire warning shots. He had convinced Briggs to invest in better lighting and to vary the routine so that anyone watching would have a harder time predicting patterns. But the raiders had not come back yet, and Kade knew that could mean one of two things. Either his presence had scared them off, or they were watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. He spent his evenings in the saloon, usually at the same corner table, watching the flow of people and listening to conversations. He was looking for anything that might give him a clue as to who was feeding information to the raiders. It was a mining town, which meant everyone knew everyone else's business, but it also meant that loyalties could be complicated. A man might work at the mine but have a brother or cousin on the other side of the law. Someone might resent Briggs or the other owners and see the raids as a kind of justice. It was nearly 2 weeks into his stay when Olivia finally sat down at his table. The saloon had emptied out for the night, and she was making her final rounds with a cloth and a tray of empty glasses. She set the tray down and lowered herself into the chair across from him with a sigh that spoke of a long day. "You are watching everyone," she said quietly. Kade did not deny it. "Part of the job. You think someone here is involved. I think someone knows something. Whether they are involved or just scared, I cannot say yet." Olivia was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of an empty glass. "People in Kingston are afraid. The mine is the only real work for miles. If it closes, the town dies. But that also means people are willing to do desperate things to survive. Is that your way of telling me I should be careful?" She looked up, and her eyes were serious. "It is my way of saying that not everything is as simple as good men and bad men. Sometimes people are just trying to live." Kade studied her, this woman who had become part of his daily ritual without him quite realizing it. "You have been here long, 3 years. I came with my husband. He worked at the mine." She paused, and Kade saw the shadow cross her face. "He died in a tunnel collapse 2 years ago. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, and because the owner of this place needed someone to run it. So here I am." "I am sorry," Kade said, and he meant it. Olivia shrugged, a small gesture that tried to dismiss the weight of her grief but did not quite succeed. Life in a mining town. People die, people move on, you learn to accept it or you go mad. She stood, picking up the tray. "I should finish closing up." "Olivia," Kade said, and she turned back. "Thank you for the coffee every morning, it makes a difference." This time the smile reached her eyes. "You are welcome, Kade Emerson." The raid came 3 nights later, and it came hard. Kade had been dozing in a chair outside the mine office, his rifle across his lap, when he heard the first shots. He was on his feet instantly, shouting for the guards to hold their positions as dark figures appeared on the ridge to the north. The raiders had learned from their previous attempts and come in force, at least a dozen men this time, and they were not being subtle. Gunfire erupted across the camp, bullets kicking up dust and sparking off metal equipment. Kade dropped behind a ore cart and returned fire, his shots measured and deliberate. He saw one raider fall, then another, but they kept coming. To his credit, the guards he had trained held their ground, firing from the positions he had assigned them and forcing the raiders to take cover. The battle lasted perhaps 15 minutes, though it felt like hours. When it finally ended, the raiders retreating back into the darkness, Kade did a quick count. 2 miners wounded, neither seriously. 3 raiders down, 1 dead and 2 wounded badly enough that they would not get far. And most importantly, no ore stolen, no equipment destroyed. It was as close to a victory as he could have hoped for. Briggs was ecstatic when he arrived at dawn, having hidden in the office during the fighting. "You did it, Emerson. You beat them back, this time," Kade said grimly. "They will regroup. They will come again. Then we will be ready. We will double the guards, triple them if we have to. You will train more men. We can hold them off now." But Kade was not so sure. The raiders had been organized, disciplined, better than simple bandits should be. Someone was leading them, someone with military experience perhaps, and they would not give up easily. He needed to find out who that was, and he needed to do it before more people died. He rode back to Kingston as the sun was rising, his body aching from the night's exertion. The saloon was just opening when he arrived, and Olivia was behind the bar as always, the coffee pot already heating. She took one look at him and her expression tightened. "You are hurt." Kade glanced down and realized there was blood on his sleeve, though he had not felt the wound in the heat of the fight. Just a graze, nothing serious. "Sit down." It was not a request. Olivia disappeared into the back and returned with a basin of water and clean cloth. She rolled up his sleeve without ceremony and began cleaning the wound, her touch gentle but efficient. "You should see a doctor. It is fine, really. Men always say that right before they collapse from blood loss or infection." But she was already wrapping the wound with strips of clean cloth, her fingers quick and sure. "There was a raid." "How did you know?" "Because you look like someone who has been in a fight, and because people are already talking. News travels fast in a small town." She finished tying off the bandage and sat back. "Was it bad?" "Bad enough. They will try again." Olivia's face was troubled. "And you will be there when they do. That is what they are paying me for. Is it worth it, your life for their gold?" It was a question Kade had asked himself many times over the years, and he still did not have a good answer. "It is what I know how to do, what I am good at." "There are other things you could be good at," Olivia said softly. "Other ways to live." Before Kade could respond, the saloon door swung open and Briggs strode in, followed by 2 other men Kade recognized as prominent businessmen in Kingston. They launched into excited discussion of the previous night's events, praising Kade's tactics and discussing how to fortify the mine further. But through it all, Kade found his attention drifting back to Olivia, to the concern in her eyes and the words she had spoken. Other ways to live. He wondered what that might look like. The wounded raiders provided the first real break in the case. One of them, delirious with fever from his injuries, talked before he died. He mentioned a name, Clayton. And he mentioned meetings in Kingston, supplies being gathered, someone on the inside providing information. The sheriff, a lazy man named Hodges who Kade had little respect for, was inclined to dismiss the ravings of a dying outlaw. But Kade was not. He began asking questions around town, carefully and quietly. Clayton was a common enough name, but there were only 2 men in Kingston who bore it. One was a prospector in his 60s who could barely walk. The other was a young man, maybe 25, who worked as a clerk in the assayer's office. His name was Martin Clayton, and when Kade started watching him, he noticed things. The way Clayton would sometimes slip out the back of the office in the middle of the day. The way he would take meals at odd hours, as if meeting someone. The nervous energy that seemed to radiate off him. Kade followed him one evening to a shack on the outskirts of town, and abandoned prospectors claimed that no one had used in years. Through a gap in the boards, he saw Clayton meeting with 3 men, all armed, all with the hard look of professional criminals. They were planning another raid, discussing numbers and timing and payment. And they were mentioning someone else, someone they called the captain, who was organizing everything. Kade had heard enough. He waited until Clayton left, then approached the shack with his gun drawn. The confrontation was brief and violent. 2 of the men died before they could draw their weapons. The third, seeing he was outmatched, threw down his gun and raised his hands. "The captain," Kade said, his pistol aimed at the man's chest. "Who is he?" "I do not know his real name, I swear. We just meet him on the trail, take his orders, collect our pay. He is the one who knows everything about the mine, the schedules, all of it. And Clayton provides the information. Clayton is a coward. He does what the captain tells him because he is in debt, gambling debts mostly. The captain said he would kill him if he did not cooperate." Kade considered this. "Where do you meet the captain?" "There is an old line shack about 10 miles north. That is where he stays between raids, but he is careful, always has men with him. You cannot take him alone." "We will see about that." Kade brought the surviving raider to the sheriff, along with the bodies of the other 2, and laid out everything he had learned. Hodges, realizing that he could no longer ignore the situation, agreed to deputize a group of men and ride out to the line shack. They left before dawn, Kade leading the way, his mind already working through the tactical considerations of the coming fight. The line shack was exactly where the raider had said it would be, nestled in a small canyon with a good view of the approaches. But Kade had been in situations like this before. He split the posse into 3 groups, sending them around to block the exits while he approached from the front. When he was 50 yards out, he called out, "This is Kade Emerson. The man inside, you are surrounded. Come out with your hands up and you will get a trial. Stay inside and we will burn you out." There was a long silence and then a voice answered. "Emerson, heard about you, heard you were good, did not think you were good enough to find me. You have 5 minutes to decide. Or what? You will kill me. I have been killed it before, friend. Takes more than threats." Kade was about to respond when a shot rang out from inside the shack, followed by a scream. Then the door burst open and a man stumbled out, clutching his leg. Behind him, another man appeared, tall and lean with a military bearing, his pistol still smoking. "He was going to surrender," the man said casually. "Cannot have that. Bad for morale." The captain, as he was called, looked directly at Kade with a smile that held no warmth. "You want me, Emerson. Come and get me." What followed was a standoff that lasted most of the morning. The captain was smart, using the wounded man as a shield and making it impossible to get a clean shot. But he had not counted on the patience of the posse or Kade's willingness to wait him out. As the hours passed and the sun climbed higher, the heat inside the shack became unbearable. Finally, driven by thirst and desperation, the captain made a break for it. He did not get far. Kade's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. The posse rushed in and it was over. The captain, whose real name turned out to be Marcus Thorne, a former Army sergeant dishonorably discharged for theft, was bound and hauled back to Kingston to stand trial. With Clayton arrested and Thorne in custody, the raid stopped. The mine resumed full operations, and Briggs made good on the second half of Kade's payment. Kingston began to feel like a town again instead of a place under siege, and Kade found himself with nothing to do. He should have moved on. That was what he always did, from town to town, from job to job, never staying long enough to put down roots. But something kept him in Kingston, something that made him wake up each morning and head downstairs for coffee, something that made him linger over his breakfast and find reasons to be in the saloon when Olivia was working. It was she who finally addressed it, one evening when they were alone. The last customer had left, and Kade was helping her stack chairs on tables so she could sweep the floor. It had become a habit, this helping, though she had never asked for it. "You are still here," Olivia said, not looking at him. "The room is paid through the end of the week. The job is done. Briggs got what he paid for. There is no reason for you to stay." Kade set down the chair he was holding and turned to face her. "Maybe I am not staying for the job." Olivia finally looked up, and her eyes were conflicted, full of emotions that Kade was only beginning to understand. "You do not want to stay for me, Kade Emerson. You do not know me. You do not know the life I have lived or the things I have done to survive. Then tell me. I want to know. Why? So you can add me to the list of things you have saved. Another job well done, another person grateful for your guns and your courage." There was bitterness in her voice now and pain. "I do not need saving. I am not another problem for you to solve. I never thought you were." Kade took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "I stay because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is your coffee. I stay because, in a life that has been nothing but moving and fighting and watching people die, you are the first person who has made me want to stop. I stay because when you look at me, I do not see judgment or fear or gratitude. I just see someone who might understand what it means to be tired of being alone." Olivia's breath caught, and for a moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were rough from work, her palm warm against his. "I am afraid," she whispered, "of me, of this, of letting myself feel something again. My husband, when he died, it nearly broke me. I told myself I would never let anyone that close again. It is easier to just keep moving, keep working, keep the world at a distance." "I know," Kade said. "I have been doing the same thing for 10 years. But Olivia, I am tired. I am tired of running, and I am tired of being alone. And if you are willing to take a chance, if you are willing to see where this goes, then I would like to stay. Not for a week, not for a job, but for you." She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw the war between fear and hope. Then, decision made, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, a question being asked. Kade answered by wrapping his arms around her and pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally broke apart, Olivia was smiling through tears. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "I do not know how to be with someone again." "Neither do I," Kade admitted, "but maybe we can figure it out together." And so Kade Emerson, who had been hired for his guns, stayed in Kingston for the woman who poured his morning coffee. He took a job as the town's deputy, working under Sheriff Hodges and gradually bringing real law and order to a place that had been wild for too long. He moved his things from the room upstairs to a small house on the edge of town that he and Olivia purchased together. A modest place with 2 bedrooms and a front porch that caught the evening breeze. Olivia continued to run the Silver Dollar, but now she had help. Kade would work his shifts and then come to the saloon in the evenings, and together they would manage the crowd and close up when the night grew late. It was a different kind of life than either of them had known, slower and quieter, but also richer in ways that surprised them both. The town accepted them readily. Kade had earned their respect by stopping the raids, and Olivia had always been well liked for her fairness and her discretion. When they married 6 months later in a simple ceremony at the small church on Main Street, it seemed to the people of Kingston like the most natural thing in the world. 2 people who had been alone finding each other. 2 people who had survived the hardness of the West learning how to be gentle with each other. The marriage was not without its challenges. Both Kade and Olivia carried scars, some visible and some not, from the lives they had lived before Kingston. There were nights when Kade would wake from nightmares about the men he had killed, about the violence he had both witnessed and perpetrated. There were days when Olivia would fall into silences that could last for hours, lost in memories of her first husband and the life she had lost when the mine took him. But they learned to navigate these rough patches together. Kade learned to talk about his past instead of burying it, to trust Olivia with the parts of himself he had always kept hidden. Olivia learned to let herself be vulnerable again, to accept that love always carried the risk of loss, but that the risk was worth taking. They learned the rhythms of each other's days, the small kindnesses that made a life together work. Kade bringing her flowers from the desert when he rode patrol, Olivia making sure his coffee was exactly the way he liked it, both of them finding excuses to touch each other in passing. A hand on a shoulder, a kiss on the cheek, small affirmations that they were no longer alone. A year after their wedding, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. Kade worried about bringing a child into a world that could still be harsh and unpredictable. Olivia worried about the risks of childbirth in a place with only a part-time doctor and few medical resources. But as her belly grew and they felt the baby kick and move, the joy began to outweigh the fear. Kade threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he had once brought to his work as a gunslinger. He added a room onto their house for the nursery. He built a cradle by hand, working late into the night until it was perfect. He read every book on child rearing he could find in Kingston's small library, much to Olivia's amusement. "You are going to be a wonderful father," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch, her hand resting on her swollen stomach. "But you do not need to know everything before the baby comes. We will figure it out as we go." "I just want to do it right," Kade said. "I want to give this child everything I never had: stability, safety, a home." Olivia took his hand and placed it on her belly, and they both felt the baby kick against his palm. "You are already giving all of that, just by being here, by choosing to stay. That is more than most children in this town ever get." The baby came in the spring of 1885, during a thunderstorm that rolled through the desert with dramatic fury. Kade paced outside the bedroom while the midwife worked, his hands clenched into fists, every cry from Olivia making him want to burst through the door. But when it was finally over and the midwife emerged with a smile, when he was allowed into the room and saw Olivia holding their son, all the fear and worry evaporated. They named him Thomas, after Olivia's father. He was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs and his mother's dark eyes. Kade held him for the first time with shaking hands, terrified he might drop this tiny, perfect creature, and felt something in his chest crack open. He had thought he knew what love was, what he felt for Olivia, but this was different. This was a love that was fierce and protective and overwhelming in its intensity. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise you I will always keep you safe." Olivia watched them from the bed, exhausted but smiling. "Look at you, the fearsome gunslinger, completely undone by a baby." "Completely," Kade agreed, unable to take his eyes off his son. The years that followed were the happiest of Kade's life. He watched Thomas grow from an infant to a toddler to a curious, energetic boy who loved nothing more than following his father around Kingston as he made his rounds. Kade taught him to ride when he was 5, to fish in the small creek that ran outside of town when he was 6. He told him stories, carefully edited versions of his adventures that emphasized bravery and justice without dwelling on the violence and death. Olivia continued to run the silver dollar, though she hired more help so she could spend time with Thomas. She was a patient, loving mother, teaching Thomas to read and write, instilling in him a love of learning that surprised both his parents. In the evenings, they would sit together as a family, Kade reading aloud while Olivia sewed and Thomas played with his toys, and it was in those moments that Kade felt most at peace. Kingston continued to grow and prosper. The mine expanded, new businesses opened, and the town began to take on the permanence of a real community rather than a temporary camp. Kade, as deputy and eventually as sheriff after Hodges retired, was instrumental in maintaining order and ensuring that the lawlessness that had once plagued the area did not return. He earned a reputation as a fair but firm lawman, someone who would rather talk a man down than shoot him, but who was perfectly capable of doing the latter if necessary. When Thomas was 8, Olivia became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and there were complications that worried both Kade and the doctor. But Olivia was strong, and when their daughter was born in the winter of 1893, she came into the world healthy and screaming her displeasure at the cold desert air. They named her Clara, and she was the spitting image of her mother, with the same dark hair and determined expression. Thomas, who had been an only child for 8 years, took to his role as big brother with enthusiasm, constantly wanting to hold her and play with her and show her everything he knew. "We have a family," Olivia said to Kade one night as they watched their children sleep, Thomas in his bed and Clara in the cradle Kade had built so many years ago. "A real family." "We do," Kade agreed, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "And I never thought I would have this. Never thought I deserved it." "You deserve it," Olivia said firmly. "You have worked for it, fought for it. We both have. And this, right here, this is what it was all for." As the children grew, so did the challenges of raising them in a frontier town. Thomas, at 10, was already showing signs of his father's stubborn streak and his mother's sharp mind. He got into fights at school, not because he was a bully, but because he had inherited Kade's sense of justice and could not stand to see smaller children picked on. Kade had to have several conversations with him about choosing his battles and using his words before his fists. Clara, meanwhile, was fearless in a way that terrified both her parents. At 3 years old, she was climbing trees, chasing lizards, and generally finding every possible way to get dirty and scraped up. Olivia joked that she was going to give them both heart attacks before she was 5. But despite the challenges, or perhaps because of them, Kade and Olivia thrived. Their love, which had begun over cups of morning coffee and quiet conversations, had deepened into something unshakable. They knew each other's moods and habits, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, and still found reasons to laugh together even after years of marriage. On their 10th anniversary, Kade arranged for someone to watch the children and took Olivia on a picnic to a spot he had found in the hills outside Kingston. It was a small canyon with a spring and shade trees, a pocket of green in the desert that felt almost magical. They spread a blanket and ate the food Olivia had prepared, talking and laughing like they were courting again. "Do you ever regret it?" Olivia asked at one point, lying on the blanket with her head on Kade's shoulder. "Staying here, giving up the life you had before?" Kade did not even have to think about it. Not for a single moment. That life, it was not really living. It was just surviving, moving from one job to the next, never letting myself feel anything or care about anyone. This, what we have here, this is real. This is what I was searching for all those years without even knowing it. "I am glad you stayed," Olivia said softly. "I am glad you were here that morning when you walked into the saloon. I am glad I poured your coffee." "So am I. Best cup of coffee I ever had." Olivia laughed and swatted his arm. It was not about the coffee. No, Kade agreed, turning to kiss her. It was never about the coffee. As the years continued to pass, Kingston changed around them. The rough edges of the frontier town smoothed out. More families moved in, a school was built, and the main street was lined with proper businesses instead of hastily constructed shacks. The mine continued to be profitable, though there were periodic booms and busts that kept everyone on edge. Through it all, Kade maintained order and Olivia kept the silver dollar running, both of them pillars of the community in their own ways. Thomas grew into a serious young man, tall and lean like his father, with his mother's thoughtfulness. At 16, he announced that he wanted to study law to become a lawyer. Kade, who had spent his life on the other side of the law in many ways, could not have been prouder. He and Olivia scraped together money to send Thomas to San Francisco for schooling, a sacrifice that was difficult but necessary. Clara, at 11, was still the wild child, though she had channeled her energy into more productive pursuits. She loved horses and spent every free moment at the stables, learning to ride and care for the animals. She talked constantly about wanting to have her own ranch someday, a dream that Kade encouraged even as he worried about the practicalities of such a life for a young woman. On a spring morning in 1899, Kade woke before dawn as he always did and headed downstairs. Olivia was already in the kitchen, the coffee pot heating on the stove. It was a scene that had repeated itself thousands of times over the years, but it still made Kade smile. She poured him a cup without asking, knowing exactly how he took it, and handed it to him with a kiss. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he replied, and they stood together in the quiet kitchen, drinking their coffee and watching the sun rise through the window. "Do you remember the first time I poured you coffee?" Olivia asked. "Of course. You barely said 2 words to me. I thought you did not like me. I did not know you. I had seen too many men like you come through Kingston, men who brought violence and then left. I did not want anything to do with that. What changed your mind?" Olivia smiled. "You kept coming back. Every morning you would sit at that bar and drink your coffee and not cause any trouble. You were polite to me, but you did not push. You just let me be. And slowly, I started to see that maybe you were different. Maybe you were someone I could trust. I am glad you took that chance. Me too. I cannot imagine my life without you now, cannot imagine what it would have been like if you had just ridden away after the job was done." Kade set down his cup and took her hands in his. "I will never ride away. This is my home. You are my home. You and the children, this town, this life we have built together. I am here until the end. Promise. I promise." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the early morning light, 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. The coffee cooled in their cups, forgotten, as they remembered the journey that had brought them here and looked forward to the years still ahead. Life in Kingston settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas came home from San Francisco for visits, regaling them with stories of his studies and the exciting, modern world of the city. He had grown into an impressive young man, articulate and passionate about justice in a way that reminded Kade of his younger self, but without the violence that had marked Kade's youth. Thomas talked about opening a law practice in Kingston when he graduated, about bringing real legal services to the small towns and mining communities that dotted Nevada. Kade could see the pride shining in Olivia's eyes every time Thomas spoke about his plans. Clara, now 14, had indeed pursued her passion for horses. She worked at the stable after school and on weekends, earning money to buy her first horse, a spirited mare she named Juniper. Kade taught her to shoot, knowing that a young woman in the West needed to be able to protect herself, and was impressed by her natural accuracy. Clara had inherited his steady hands and his patience, qualities that served her well both with horses and firearms. The Silver Dollar had become more than just a saloon over the years. Under Olivia's management, it had evolved into the social center of Kingston, a place where town meetings were held, where celebrations were hosted, where newcomers were welcomed, and old-timers gathered to swap stories. Olivia had expanded the kitchen, offering full meals alongside the drinks, and had hired a small staff that she trained personally. The rowdy, rough atmosphere of the early days had been replaced by something more family-friendly, though it still maintained enough of its original character to satisfy the miners and cowboys who had been coming there for years. Kade, now in his late 40s, had grown into the role of sheriff in ways he never could have anticipated. The young gunslinger who had ridden into Kingston 20 years ago would hardly recognize the man he had become. His hair had threads of silver at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the desert sun. But his aim was still true, and his reputation still commanded respect. More importantly, he had learned that being a good lawman was less about being quick with a gun and more about knowing your community, understanding people's struggles, and finding ways to keep the peace without bloodshed. He worked closely with the town council to implement improvements: better street lighting, a volunteer fire brigade, regular patrols that extended beyond the town limits to protect homesteaders and travelers. Kingston was no longer the wild, dangerous place it had been when he first arrived. It was a real town with a future, and Kade took pride in his part in making that happen. One evening, as Kade was making his final rounds before heading home, he encountered a young man standing outside the Silver Dollar, looking uncertain. The stranger was dusty from travel, his clothes worn, and he wore a gun belt slung low on his hip in a way that Kade recognized immediately. It was the stance of someone who had hired out their gun skills, someone looking for work that probably involved violence. "Help you with something?" Kade asked, keeping his tone neutral. The young man turned, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon before he caught himself. "Just riding through. Heard this town might need a man who can handle trouble." "Where did you hear that?" "Word travels." "Mining town, valuable cargo, always someone looking to make trouble. Figured I could make myself useful." Kade studied him, seeing his younger self in the kid's restless eyes and defensive posture. "What is your name?" "Jake Mercer." "Well, Jake Mercer, I am afraid you heard wrong. Kingston does not need guns for hire anymore. We have law here, proper law. We have a community that looks after itself. If you are looking for that kind of work, you will have to keep riding." Jake's face fell, and Kade saw the desperation beneath the bravado. "I have not eaten in 2 days, Sheriff. If you are telling me to move on, at least let me have a meal first." Kade considered this, then nodded toward the Silver Dollar. "Go on inside. Tell Olivia, the woman running the place, that I sent you for dinner. On the house. After that, you can bed down in the stable for the night, but come morning I want you gone." "Thank you, Sheriff." As Jake headed inside, Olivia emerged, having seen the exchange through the window. She came to stand beside Kade, slipping her hand into his. "He reminds you of yourself," she said. "He does. Angry, lost, thinking that violence is the only thing he is good for. You were never just about violence, Kade. Even when you thought you were, maybe. But I was lucky. I found a reason to change, to want something different. That kid, he is still looking. I just hope he finds it before it is too late." They watched through the window as Olivia's staff brought Jake a plate of food. The young man ate like he was starving, which he probably was. When he was done, he came back outside, nodded respectfully to Kade, and headed toward the stable. "Do you think he will actually leave in the morning?" Olivia asked. I think so. He has that look, that restlessness. He is not ready to settle down yet, has to ride it out of his system first. Like you did. Like I did. Only I hope he is smarter about it than I was. Hope he figures out what matters before he has too many ghosts following him around. They walked home together through the quiet streets of Kingston, past the houses where lights were winking out as families settled in for the night. Their own home was warm and welcoming when they arrived, Clara already asleep upstairs after a long day at the stables. They prepared for bed in the comfortable silence of long marriage, Kade hanging his gun belt on its peg while Olivia brushed out her hair. In bed, lying in the darkness, Olivia spoke softly. Do you ever think about those early days when you first came here? Sometimes. It feels like another life almost, like it happened to someone else. In some ways it did. You are not the same man who rode into town looking for hired gun work. No. That man was alone and angry and did not know how to be anything else. This man has a family, a home, people he cares about. This man knows what it means to be happy. Olivia rolled over to face him, her hand finding his in the darkness. I love you, Kade Emerson. I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. They fell asleep like that, hands linked, hearts aligned, two people who had found in each other the peace and purpose they had both been searching for. The seasons turned. Thomas graduated from law school with honors and returned to Kingston to open his practice, setting up an office next to the bank. His first clients were miners with grievances against the mining company, and he threw himself into their cases with a passion that reminded Kade why he had fallen in love with the law himself, albeit from the enforcement side. Thomas won more often than he lost, earning a reputation as a fierce advocate for the working men and women of the territory. Clara, at 17, was offered a job at a large ranch 50 miles from Kingston, working with their breeding program. It was an incredible opportunity, but it meant leaving home. The decision was agonizing for all of them, but particularly for Olivia, who was not ready to let her daughter go. In the end, they decided that Clara would take the job but come home once a month, and that they would visit her as often as they could. The day Clara left, Olivia cried for the first time in years. Kade held her on their front porch, watching the wagon carry their daughter away, and felt his own throat tighten with emotion. Their children were grown, building their own lives, and while he was proud, he also felt the bittersweet passage of time. The house is going to be so quiet, Olivia said, wiping her eyes. It is, but they are doing what they need to do. Thomas is fighting for justice, Clara is following her passion. We raised them right, Olivia, they are going to be fine. I know, I just miss them already. Me too. But we still have each other, and we are not done yet. There is still plenty of life left to live. Olivia managed a smile. You are right. We have come too far to slow down now, and they did not slow down. Kade continued as sheriff, mentoring a young deputy named Ben who showed promise. Olivia expanded the silver dollar again, adding a small hotel annex to accommodate the increasing number of travelers passing through Kingston. They threw themselves into their work and their community, but they also made time for each other, taking Sunday rides into the desert, spending evenings on their porch watching the sunset, finding small moments of peace and joy in the midst of busy lives. Years passed with the steady inevitability of the desert seasons. Thomas married a teacher from Virginia City, a smart, kind woman named Sarah who fit into the family seamlessly. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, making Kade and Olivia grandparents. Clara eventually opened her own horse ranch with a business partner, a quiet man named Daniel who shared her passion for the animals. They married in a small ceremony at the ranch, with Kade walking Clara down an aisle marked by wildflowers and Olivia weeping happy tears throughout. Kingston continued to grow and change. The railroad came through in 1905, connecting the town to the wider world in ways that brought both opportunities and challenges. The population swelled, new businesses opened, and the rough frontier town Kade had first known became a proper city, complete with paved streets and electric lights. Through it all, one thing remained constant. Every morning, Kade would come downstairs to find Olivia in the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee. The ritual had not changed in over 25 years. She would pour him a cup, they would talk about their plans for the day, and then they would go about their separate tasks, knowing they would come back together in the evening. On a spring morning in 1910, Kade woke to find sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and Olivia still asleep beside him. It was unusual. She was almost always awake before him. He studied her face in the gentle light, seeing the woman he loved beneath the lines that time had etched there. Her hair was more gray than dark now. Her hands showed the work of decades. But to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her behind the bar of the Silver Dollar. He rose quietly and went downstairs, intending to surprise her by making the coffee himself for once. As he went through the familiar motions, grinding the beans, heating the water, measuring everything just the way she did, he found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him here. All the choices he had made, all the places he had been, had led to that Tuesday morning when he rode into Kingston looking for hired gun work. If any one thing had been different, if he had taken another job or ridden to another town, he never would have met Olivia. He never would have built this life. The universe, he thought, had been kind to him. Kinder than he deserved, perhaps, but he was grateful for it every single day. When the coffee was ready, he poured 2 cups and carried them upstairs. Olivia was awake now, sitting up in bed and looking concerned. "You made coffee," she said, surprised. "Figured it was my turn. Only took me 25 years to learn how." She laughed and accepted the cup, taking a sip. "It is good. You have been paying attention. Hard not to, after all this time. I have watched you make it thousands of times." They sat together in bed, drinking their coffee and watching the morning unfold outside their window. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of Kingston waking up, the town they had helped build continuing its daily rhythms. "You remember what you told me once?" Kade asked. "About how life in a mining town means people die and people move on and you either accept it or go mad." "I remember. I was very cynical back then." "You were surviving. But the point is, I think you were wrong. People do not just die and move on. They build things, they create legacies, they touch other lives in ways that matter. We did that. We built something real here, something that will last beyond us." Olivia set down her cup and took his hand. "We did, and we did it together. That is what I am most proud of, Kade. Not the saloon or the town or any of the rest of it. I am proud that we found each other and we held on, even when it was hard, even when we were scared. We built a life worth living." "The best life," Kade agreed, "and it all started with a cup of coffee. It started with you walking through those doors. It started with you being brave enough to stay when everything in your past told you to run. It started with both of us taking a chance on something we did not know we needed." They sat there for a long time, 2 people who had found home in each other, remembering the past and grateful for the present. Outside, Kingston continued its busy day, the town that had brought them together and given them a place to belong. And in that moment, in that small bedroom in a house on the edge of the desert, Kade Emerson and Olivia Fairbanks knew exactly what it meant to be loved completely, and to love completely in return. The years that followed were gentle ones. Kade eventually retired from being sheriff, passing the badge to his deputy Ben, who had learned well and was ready for the responsibility. Kade found that retirement suited him. He had spent enough of his life chasing danger and keeping order. Now he could focus on the things that mattered most: his family, his community, and the woman who had changed everything. He and Olivia became fixtures in Kingston, the older couple who knew everyone and whom everyone respected. They were the people you went to for advice or help, the ones who had been around long enough to have seen everything and survived it all. Young couples would come to them for marriage advice, parents would seek their counsel about raising children, business owners would ask their opinion on new ventures. Thomas's law practice thrived, and he eventually ran for territorial legislature, winning handily. He would come home for visits with Sarah and their growing family, filling the house with noise and laughter. Clara's ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for producing fine horses that were sought after throughout Nevada and California. She and Daniel had 3 children who grew up as comfortable in the saddle as on their own feet. Kade and Olivia watched their grandchildren grow, delighting in each visit, each milestone, each moment of joy. They told stories of the old days, carefully edited to emphasize adventure over danger, love over loss. The grandchildren loved hearing how their grandfather had come to town as a hired gun and stayed for the woman who poured his morning coffee. How a simple daily ritual had blossomed into a love that had lasted decades. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire town turned out for a celebration at the Silver Dollar. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, a feast that Olivia's staff had prepared with loving care. Kade, who had never been comfortable being the center of attention, endured it all with good grace because he could see how happy it made Olivia. At one point in the evening, Thomas stood up to make a toast. "My parents taught me everything important I know," he said, his voice carrying through the crowded room. "Not just the practical things, though there were plenty of those. They taught me about loyalty, about standing up for what is right, about the importance of community. But most of all, they taught me what real love looks like. Not the easy kind, not the kind that fades when things get hard, but the kind that endures. The kind that grows stronger with time. The kind that makes you a better person just by being part of it. Dad, Mom, thank you for showing us all how it is done. Congratulations on 40 years. The room erupted in applause and Kade felt Olivia's hand tighten in his. He looked at her and saw tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "We did all right," she whispered. "We did more than all right," he replied. "We did something extraordinary." As the party continued around them, Kade and Olivia slipped outside for a moment of quiet. They stood on the porch of the Silver Dollar, looking out at the town they loved, the place that had become home in ways neither of them could have imagined all those years ago. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Olivia asked. "If you had ridden away after the job was done, if I had kept my distance, if we had been too scared to take a chance, sometimes. But then I remember that I was looking for something, even if I did not know what it was. I think I would have kept searching until I found it. I was lucky that I found it here, found it with you. We were both lucky. 2 people who thought they were done with love, who thought they had used up their share of happiness. And then life surprised us." Kade put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Here is to being surprised. Here is to taking chances. Here is to 40 years of morning coffee and everything that came with it. And to however many years we have left," Olivia added. "Because I am not done with you yet, Kade Emerson, not by a long shot." They stood there together as the celebration continued inside. 2 people who had built a love story in the wildest of places, who had taken the rough materials of their past lives and crafted something beautiful and enduring. The desert stretched out around them, vast and eternal, but they were no longer alone in it. They had each other, their family, their community. They had home. The years continued to unfold with a gentle inevitability. Kade's hair turned fully white, and his hands developed the tremor of age, but his mind remained sharp and his heart remained full. Olivia moved a bit slower than she once had, her joints stiff on cold mornings, but her spirit was undimmed. They adapted to the changes that age brought, helping each other in ways both large and small, never complaining about the passage of time because they knew how fortunate they were to be growing old together. Kingston entered the modern age. Automobiles began to appear on the streets alongside horses and wagons. The mine, after decades of profitable operation, began to play out, and the town had to reinvent itself as a commercial and ranching center rather than purely a mining community. Some people left, seeking opportunities elsewhere, but many stayed. Kingston had become more than just a place to extract wealth from the ground. It had become a real community with roots that ran deep. The silver dollar changed with the times. Prohibition nearly shut it down, but Olivia pivoted, focusing more on the restaurant and hotel aspects of the business. When the law was finally repealed, she was ready to resume full operations, though by then she had handed over the day-to-day management to trusted employees. She and Kade had earned their rest and they took it, spending their days in comfortable routine. Every morning, without fail, they would have coffee together. Sometimes they talked about big things, the state of the world or their worries about their children and grandchildren. Sometimes they talked about small things, the weather or what they would have for dinner, or whether they should plant tomatoes in the garden this year. And sometimes they did not talk at all, just sat together in companionable silence, the presence of the other person all the communication they needed. On a morning in late autumn of 1924, Kade woke to find Olivia already awake beside him, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "What is it?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing bad. I was just thinking about how glad I am that you walked into my saloon all those years ago. How glad I am that you stayed." Kade smiled and reached for her hand. "I am glad too. It was the best decision I ever made. The only decision that really mattered. We have had a good life, haven't we? The best. Better than I ever dreamed was possible." They rose and went through their morning routine, Olivia making the coffee while Kade set out cups and plates. When it was ready, they sat at their kitchen table, the same table they had eaten at for decades, and sipped their coffee and watched the morning light paint the desert in shades of gold and amber. "I love you," Olivia said suddenly. "I know I say it all the time, but I want you to know that I mean it today as much as I did the first time I said it. More even, because now I know what those words really mean. I know what it is to love someone through everything, to build a life together, to grow old together. And I would not change a single thing." Kade felt his throat tighten with emotion. After all these years, she could still move him so deeply. "I love you too. You saved my life, Olivia, not in some dramatic way, but in the way that really matters. You gave me a reason to stop running, to start living. You gave me a home. I will never be able to thank you enough for that. You do not need to thank me. You gave me the same thing. We saved each other." They finished their coffee in silence, holding hands across the table, two people who had found in each other everything they needed. Outside, Kingston was waking up, beginning another day. Inside this small house on the edge of town, two hearts beat in synchrony, bound together by love and choice and 4 decades of shared life. That afternoon, Kade felt a pain in his chest, sharp and sudden. He tried to hide it, not wanting to worry Olivia, but she knew him too well. She saw the way he pressed his hand to his ribs, the sudden pallor of his face, and she was beside him in an instant. "I am getting the doctor," she said, already moving toward the door. "It is passing," Kade said, and it was true. The pain was fading, leaving behind only a dull ache. "I am fine." But Olivia insisted, and within an hour Dr. Morrison was there, examining Kade with a practiced eye. When he was done, his face was grave. "Your heart is wearing out," he said bluntly. "It happens at your age. Could be days, could be years, but you need to take it easy. No stress, no exertion. Rest as much as you can." After the doctor left, Kade and Olivia sat together on their porch, processing the news. They both knew what it meant. The years they had left were numbered now, finite in a way they had always been, but had never felt quite so real. "I am not ready," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "I know that is selfish, but I am not ready to lose you." "You are not going to lose me," Kade said firmly. "Not for a while yet. I am too stubborn for that, and I have too much to live for." He pulled her close, feeling her tremble against him. "We will face this the way we have faced everything else, together." And they did. Kade slowed down, accepting the limitations of his aging body with the same pragmatism he had brought to everything else in his life. He spent more time at home, less time in town. He read more, napped in the afternoon sun, let Olivia fuss over him in ways he once would have protested. The grandchildren came to visit often, and Kade cherished every moment with them, telling them stories and imparting what wisdom he had gained in his long, eventful life. Thomas and Clara were there more too, drawn by the unspoken knowledge that their time with their father was growing short. They sat with him for hours, talking about everything and nothing, storing up memories against the inevitable day when he would no longer be there. But that day did not come as quickly as the doctor feared. Kade's stubborn will and Olivia's devoted care kept him going through the winter and into the spring. He grew frailer, his body betraying him in small ways, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for his family never dimmed. On a morning in May of 1925, Kade woke to find himself struggling to breathe. Olivia was beside him immediately, her hand on his chest, her voice in his ear telling him it would be all right. But they both knew it would not be. This was the moment they had been dreading, the moment when time ran out. "Get the children," Kade managed to say, and Olivia did, sending word to Thomas in town and to Clara at her ranch. They came quickly, gathering around their father's bed with their families, creating a circle of love and support. Kade looked at each of them in turn, his children and their spouses, his grandchildren with their young, worried faces. "I am so proud of all of you," he said, his voice weak but clear. "You have built good lives, you have become good people, that is all a father can ask for." "Dad, do not," Thomas said, tears streaming down his face. "Do not say goodbye yet." "Have to," Kade said gently, "but it is all right. I have lived a good, long life, I have loved and been loved. I have no regrets, no unfinished business. I am ready." He turned his head to look at Olivia, who was sitting beside him, holding his hand with a grip that suggested she might never let go. "You," he whispered, "you were everything. Every good thing in my life came from you. Promise me you will be all right. Promise me you will keep living, keep finding joy." "I promise," Olivia said through her tears, "but you have to promise me something too. Promise me you will wait for me. When my time comes, you will be there." "I will be there," Kade said. "I will always be there for you. Death will not change that. Nothing could change that." He closed his eyes then, exhausted from the effort of speaking. His breathing grew shallow, more labored. The family gathered closer, Clara taking his other hand, Thomas placing a hand on his shoulder. They stayed like that for hours, keeping vigil, until finally, As the sun was setting and painting the desert in shades of fire, Kade Emerson took his last breath and was gone. The silence that followed was profound. Olivia bowed her head over their joined hands, her tears falling on his still fingers. Thomas and Clara wept openly, holding each other and their father. The grandchildren cried quietly, saying their own goodbyes. And outside, Kingston went about its evening, unaware that one of its founding pillars had just passed from the world. The funeral was held 3 days later, and it seemed like the entire town turned out. Kade was laid to rest in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Kingston, the town he had helped build and protect. The headstone was simple. Kade Emerson, 1857–1925. Beloved husband, father, and friend, he stayed. In the weeks and months that followed, Olivia moved through her grief in a daze. The house felt impossibly empty without Kade's presence. She still woke early, still made coffee, but now she only poured 1 cup instead of 2, and the sight of that single cup on the table broke her heart afresh each morning. Thomas and Clara worried about her, checking in constantly, trying to convince her to come stay with one of them. But Olivia refused. This was her home, the place she had shared with Kade. She was not ready to leave it, might never be ready. Slowly, gradually, she found her way back to living. She returned to the silver dollar, not to work but to visit with old friends and new. She spent time with her grandchildren, delighting in their growth and their accomplishments. She tended the garden she and Kade had planted together, finding solace in the rhythm of the seasons and the persistence of life. But every morning, without fail, she would sit at the kitchen table with her single cup of coffee and talk to Kade as if he were still there. She told him about her day, about the children and grandchildren, about the changes in Kingston. She told him how much she missed him, how hard it was to go on without him, but also how grateful she was for the life they had shared. "You kept your promise," she would say. "You stayed. You gave me everything. And now I am keeping my promise to you. I am living. I am finding joy where I can. But do not think for a moment that I am not counting the days until I see you again." 5 years passed. Olivia grew older, frailer, but her spirit remained strong. She saw Thomas elected to Congress, representing Nevada in Washington with the same fierce dedication to justice that had always defined him. She watched Clara's ranch become one of the most respected in the West, her daughter building a legacy of her own. She held great-grandchildren in her arms and marveled at the family she and Kade had created, the ripples of love spreading outward through generations. On a spring morning in 1930, Olivia woke feeling different. There was no pain, no particular symptom, but she knew with absolute certainty that her time had come. She rose and went through her morning routine one last time, making coffee and pouring herself a cup. But this morning, she also poured a second cup and set it across from her at the table. "Today is the day," she said to the empty chair where Kade used to sit. "I am coming home to you." She called for Thomas and Clara, and they came quickly, alarmed by something in her voice. When they arrived, they found her at the kitchen table, peaceful and smiling, the 2 cups of coffee sitting there like a promise kept. "Do not be sad," she told them as they gathered around her. "I have lived a long, full life. I have known great love, have been part of something beautiful. Your father is waiting for me, and I am ready to go to him." "Mom," Clara said, crying, "we are not ready to lose you." "I know, sweetheart, and I am sorry for that. But the best gift I can give you is to show you that there is nothing to fear. Death is not an ending. It is just the next part of the journey, and I get to take that journey back to the man I love." She talked with them for a while longer, making sure they knew how proud she was, how much she loved them, how the legacy she and Kade had built would continue through them and their children. And then, as the morning sun streamed through the window, Olivia Fairbanks Emerson closed her eyes, smiled, and let go. They buried her beside Kade on the hill overlooking Kingston. The headstone read, Olivia Fairbanks Emerson, 1859–1930. Beloved wife, mother, and friend. She waited. The story of Kade and Olivia became part of Kingston's folklore, passed down through generations. The gunslinger who had been hired for his guns but stayed for the woman who poured his morning coffee. Two lonely people who had found each other and built something lasting in the harsh but beautiful landscape of the West. Their house stood for many years, eventually becoming a museum dedicated to the early history of Kingston. The silver dollar still operated, though under different ownership, and on one wall hung a photograph of Kade and Olivia on their wedding day, young and hopeful and deeply in love. Thomas and Clara grew old themselves, always remaining close despite living in different places. They told their children and grandchildren about their parents, about the love story that had defined their family. And every year on the anniversary of Kade and Olivia's wedding, the family would gather in Kingston, visiting the graves on the hill and the museum that had once been their grandparents' home, remembering and honoring the legacy of love that had been left to them. Because that was what endured in the end, not the violence of Kade's early life or the hardship of Olivia's widowhood, not the raids on the mine or the rough justice of frontier Nevada. What endured was love. Simple, profound, transformative love between two people who had been brave enough to stay, to commit, to build something beautiful together in a place and time that was anything but gentle. The desert remained, vast and eternal. Kingston continued to grow and change, evolving with the times but never forgetting its roots. And on the hill where two headstones stood side by side, the wind would sometimes blow in such a way that it sounded almost like voices, like two people talking over morning coffee, their conversation continuing on into eternity. They had been hired for different things, Kade for his guns and Olivia for her ability to run a saloon. But what they had found was infinitely more valuable. They had found home in each other. They had found purpose in building a life together. They had found that love, real love, was worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of vulnerability. And in the end, that was the story that mattered. Not of a gunslinger or a saloon keeper, but of two hearts that had recognized each other across a bar on a Tuesday morning in Nevada and had chosen to stay together through everything that life could throw at them. They had been lucky, yes, but they had also been brave. And that combination of luck and bravery had created something that would echo through the generations, a testament to the transformative power of love in even the wildest of places. Their children prospered. Their grandchildren thrived. Their great-grandchildren carried their names and their values forward into a world that would have been unrecognizable to the couple who had started it all. But the core lesson remained the same, passed down through the family like a precious heirloom. Stay for the things that matter. Stay for the people who make you better. Stay for love, because in the end, love is all that truly lasts. And so the story of Kade Emerson and Olivia Fairbanks became more than just a historical footnote. It became a reminder that even in the hardest times, in the most unforgiving places, human connection can flourish. That two people who thought they were done with happiness can find it again. That a simple daily ritual, a cup of coffee poured with care, can be the foundation of a love story that spans decades and touches countless lives. Kingston, Nevada stands today as a testament to the people who built it. People like Kade and Olivia who chose to stay, to invest, to believe in something beyond themselves. The town has changed beyond recognition from the rough mining camp it once was, But on that hill where two graves rest side by side, visitors still come to pay their respects to the couple whose love story became legend. And every morning, somewhere in the world, someone pours a cup of coffee for someone they love. And in that simple gesture, the spirit of Kade and Olivia lives on.